Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is a quick review of the Fujifilm XF 23mm f2.8R WR pancake prime lens for X-mount cameras. Announced in June 2025 and costing around $400 or pounds, the XF 23 2.8 becomes Fujifilm's second pancake prime lens for the X system, following the earlier 27 2.8. Yes, I know there's two versions of that, but there's only one that's currently available. Note the 23 2.8 will initially be sold in a kit with the XE5, but it will be available separately later in the year. Both the 23 2.8 and the latest 27 2.8 are similar in size, weight, design, weather sealing and price, and share the same aperture too, so the choice between them is really down to coverage, with the 23 and 27 delivering equivalent views of around 35 or 40mm in full frame terms. Either of these lenses will transform any of Fujifilm's bodies for portability, but especially so for the smaller ones like the XE5 launched alongside the 23 2.8. In fact, this combination becomes essentially the same size and weight as an X100 series camera, albeit with an aperture that's one stop dimmer. I hope to make a more detailed video comparing the 23 and 27 pancake lenses, but for now I wanted to make a quick comparison between the smaller 23s. So, in this video you're going to see how the sharpness and the bokeh compares between the 23 2.8 pancake on the left and the older 23mm f2 on the right, both of which also cost roughly $400 or pounds, give or take about 10% depending on your region and any promotions. And since many of you are going to be wondering how they measure up compared to an X100's fixed lens, I'm also going to include direct comparisons against that 23mm f2 lens employed in the latest X100 VI, just to see which one is going to deliver the sharpest results and best looking rendering. First things first, both of the XF lenses are roughly similar in diameter, but the 23mm 2.8 on the left is less than half the length and half the weight too, making it much more compact and more likely to fit into a large pocket. Both are weather sealed lenses and include clicky aperture rings, but the longer barrel means the focusing ring on the 23mm f2 is much wider and more comfortable to grip and use. Meanwhile, the filter threads measure 39 and 43mm respectively. I'm going to make some proper focusing tests in a follow-up video, but anecdotally speaking, the 23 2.8 did feel a bit slower than the 23 f2 in my initial tests. I'd place it closer to an X100 in terms of focusing performance. Okay, so for my first test, here's a view of Valencia in Spain, the location of the Fujifilm UK press trip for the XE5. You'll see Brighton Pier in a follow-up. This was taken with the XF 23mm f2.8 at f2.8. Before looking at the details though, let's compare the coverage, as not all lenses with the same quoted focal length actually capture the same view in practice. So here's the XF 23mm f2 taken moments later, showing a very similar field of view as you'd expect, maybe a fraction wider for the pixel peepers, but essentially the same. No, I tested both of the XF lenses with an XE5. But now here's the X100 VI from exactly the same position, again moments later, where you may be surprised to see it's capturing a slightly tighter field of view, at least when all of the lenses were focused on a distant subject. Now it's not a huge difference to be fair, but it is necessary to point out as the crops are going to be showing slightly different parts of the scene. Also note the conditions brightened a little bit during my X100 tests, so perhaps the sun really does shine on this camera after all. So let's return to the XF 23 2.8 here at f2.8 before zooming into the middle for a closer look. I'm going to put the XF 23 2.8 on the left, the XF 23 f2 in the middle, and the X100 VI on the right, all seen here at their maximum apertures to start with, so that's the 23 2.8 on the left at 2.8, while the other two start at f2. I'd say there's actually very little difference between them here, with the biggest one being the higher contrast from the X100 VI, thanks to the sun peeking through a little stronger at this point. Also remember the X100 sample here will be a little bit tighter due to the coverage difference that I noted earlier. So first let's close the two f2 lenses down to f2.8 to place them all on a level playing field, and again there's little to tell them apart. Likewise at f4, so in this test, at least with a distant subject, all three are sharing similar degrees of detail when coupled with Fujifilm's latest 40 megapixel sensor, at least in the middle of the frame. Okay, so back to the XF 23 2.8, wide open at 2.8, before heading towards one of the corners. Now I've chosen this particular area as it's closer to the plane of focus than the distant towers in the background. I want to measure sharpness here, not depth of field. So again, let's keep the XF 23 2.8 on the left and compare it to the XF 23 f2 in the middle, and the X100 VI on the right, all at their maximum apertures again, so f2.8, f2 and f2 respectively. Here the XF23 f2.8 on the left and the XF23 f2 in the middle are sharing roughly similar details depending where you look, although a mild vignette on the latter at this point is actually making some of those details easier to discern. But it's the X100 VI on the right which takes the lead in detail here, visibly crisper than the two separate lenses, although do remember to take the brighter sunlight into account for this sample. Next for them all at f2.8, where the 23 f2 reduces its vignette, and the X100 VI enjoys a subtle boost in sharpness, keeping it in the lead. Now for them all at f4, where they all benefit from mild improvements, again though with the X100 taking the lead. At f5.6 though, both of the XF 23mm lenses see a more substantial improvement in this particular test, with both looking nice and crisp across most of the frame. Meanwhile, the X100 remains ahead in contrast and sharpness, even taking the slightly brighter lighting into account. Checking other areas of the frame tells a similar story. The two XF lenses are roughly in line with each other, but the X100 enjoys an edge over both when judging sharpness towards the corners. I look forward to repeating this test with my more familiar Brighton Pier scene very soon. But now for bokeh quality and the potential for background blur. I took this still life shot with both lenses on the XE5 as well as the X100 VI, all from the same distance, roughly 25cm from the bottle. Note the X100 lens can actually focus roughly twice as close as the two XF lenses, down to just 10cm versus 20cm for the 23 2.8 and 22cm for the 23 f2, and this is an important consideration for anyone who wants the greatest reproduction. Anyway, let's cycle through those samples, starting with the XF23 2.8 at 2.8 here. Next for the XF23 f2 at f2, which as before is capturing a slightly wider field of view, although more notably so at close range, probably due to breathing differences. And finally the X100 VI. Note the lens and tripod mount positions are also slightly different on this camera, so those are partly responsible for the composition shifting upwards here, but the actual size of the bottle from the same distance is a little bit smaller. Again, this is most likely down to differences in focus breathing between the three lenses on test. Okay, so let's return to the XF23 2.8 at 2.8 and zoom in a little for a closer look at the rendering. I'm going to place it on the left again, with the XF23 f2 in the middle, and the X100 VI on the right, and the latter pair are wide open here at f2. At first glance they actually look quite similar, but look closer and you'll see the bokeh blobs from the XF23 2.8 on the left are indeed a little smaller as you'd expect. Notice the larger blobs from the two f2 lenses to its right, and also what look like slightly softer edges to their rendering. You may also notice that the two XF lenses, on the left and in the middle, are both rendering oval-shaped blobs towards the edges, whereas the X100 VI lens on the right is keeping them more circular. Close the two f2 lenses down to f2.8 and their blobs become roughly similar in size to the 23 2.8 on the left, but I'd say the XF23 f2 in the middle is revealing more of the geometric shape of its diaphragm system here. Note the 23 f2 and X100 VI both share 9 aperture blade systems, but I'd say that the X100 VI's blobs are looking more rounded here, so maybe their diaphragm systems are a different shape. And finally, the three lenses close to f4, and again you're seeing similar sized blobs, but again the XF23 f2 in the middle is showing the most defined geometric shape. I'm not surprised the XF23 2.8 on the left remains more rounded than the lens in the middle, as it has an 11 bladed system and that generally allows them to be more rounded. But again, it is interesting to note the differences between the 23 f2 in the middle and the X100 VI on the right. And that's all the comparisons I have for you right now, but if you are interested, I can try to make a full review of the XF23 2.8 with my usual Brighton locations, comparing it hopefully not just to the 23 f2 and X100 lens, but also hopefully the 27 2.8 pancake. Let me know what you think in the comments and if you'd like to see this comparison. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.